So finally, we've talked about pen testing and vulnerability testing. We know all of these things that might be used by attackers to try to, we've identified all these things that attackers might use to attack us. We know what all the risks are, but what do we do about it? So that's when we talk about mitigating and deterring attacks. So there are standard techniques for mitigating and deterring attacks, creating a security posture, selecting and configuring controls, also hardening, and finally reporting. So let's talk about creating a security posture. So a security posture describes the strategy regarding security. So the elements of a security posture would be initial baseline configuration, continuous security monitoring, remediation. And I'll just go back to this for a second. So a security posture is sort of our overarching decision on what our security is going to look like. In other words, how, what type of security do we use in our organization? And I don't mean like, what tools and techniques and so forth, but, what does our organization look like from an IT security perspective? And there's different types of organizations. For example, if you're a defense contractor, you're going to have much different security requirements in an organization like that than say a healthcare provider, which is in my experience. Healthcare providers are very open. We don't have as many security controls as say a defense contractor because we don't have classified information, and what we do have that's secret, we use HIPAA, and we have some pretty modest protections that we implement for things like HIPAA. But it's a very open communication environment, whereas with something like a DoD contractor, they might have much more stringent requirements on protecting information, on compartmentalizing information. Doctors expect to be able to go on the internet and research just about anything that they want to research, whereas at a defense contractor, it may not be worth it to have the internet completely open, and you block a lot of sites. So lots of things like that we think about when we're evaluating what our security posture is going to be, or what type of security posture we have. So we can select appropriate controls that are in line with our security posture. So we're using security controls to mitigate and deter these attacks. Many different controls can be used, and we've talked about many of these before. So all of the things that we've talked about can all be considered controls that we talked about earlier in this quarter. We've talked about encryption, we talked about access control, and different integrity controls, like we talked about certificates and digital signatures, and we've talked about redundancy and fault tolerance and clustering and things like that in data centers. And of course, safety we don't really talk much about in this class, but I think we did talk about in IT Security 1. So these are some of the controls that we have available to us in our toolbox to mitigate these different vulnerabilities, to mitigate the risk of these vulnerabilities and threats that we've identified. So the key to mitigating and deterring attacks is proper configuring and testing of the controls. So some of these controls can be used to detect and prevent attacks, like an IDS or an IPS, which we've talked about previously. So another technique that we have available to us is hardening. So basically, hardening is the process that we use to eliminate as many security risks as possible. And we've talked about hardening before. So we talk about hardening in both our application software and system software sections of this course. I talked about how we do hardening, so how we evaluate systems and try to protect those systems from attack by hardening them, by protecting user accounts with stronger passwords, disabling unnecessary accounts, turning off ports and services that are not needed, turning off any management interfaces and applications that are unneeded, removing anything basically that you don't need as part of that hardening process. And then finally, we have reporting, which is providing information regarding events that do occur. So we can have alerts and alarms that are telling us when something is happening. That's part of reporting. It can provide information on trends over time. More people are trying to attempt certain types of attacks, or we're seeing more port scans on the network and things like that. And can also indicate a serious impending situation. For example, multiple user accounts experiencing multiple password attempts, right? So somebody's trying to actively attack a system. And again, this reporting functionality can typically be found in other tools like IDS and IPS, as well as vulnerability scanners. As I said before, a lot of these lines are very blurry, but it's more important that you understand that you need this type of functionality in a secure infrastructure. So that concludes this unit. We have one unit left, which is going to cover some emerging area of IT security or something that might be important in the future.